Wanted to spend a few minutes to talk about the, no pun intended, the sweetest part of this hobby or vocation or whatever you want to call it, and that's the great feelings you get from doing what you're doing and sharing with others and so forth. But honey harvesting, we all know from what you've heard the other speakers talking about that making the wax comb, collecting the nectar, storing it, dehydrating it, so it becomes honey, capping the honey so we can go take it away from the bees is the key here. The bees will draw out the foundation. Here's a frame that's got just the foundation in there. You can see the wires in it like Trevor talked about. I've got bobby pins put in to hold it that way. And then they will draw that out to make the comb. They'll go out and pick up some nectar a few thousand times, and then they store it in there. Then they convert it down to the honey. Then you'll see at the bottom of that picture, they're capping it, as you've heard several of the speakers talking about. Once they've got it capped, it's ready to go. When you're harvesting a frame, sometimes you'll go pull your frame out and it's about halfway capped. You don't want to harvest that one yet because then your moisture content's not going to be what it needs to be. So if there's a little bit at the top or in the corners that's not capped, that's okay. But you want it to be, in my view, at least 95% capped before you harvest it. Now you may have some areas that don't have anything done because they just didn't like the top left corner or whatever. But that's okay. And you've heard everybody talk about feeding your bees to help them get started. Sugar water that you make up is great because it takes a lot of energy for a bee, for a colony, to build out that comb, to go from the raw foundation to a full comb that they can store nectar in or use to grow baby bees and so forth. So using that comb from the previous year is a big help because it lets them devote their energy to collecting honey and collecting nectar and making honey, as opposed to spending their time and energy building wax comb. And then when you get into that, then you've got to get into the uncapping, the extraction, the filtering, and the bottling. And we'll show you something in a minute about how we're going to do that. And you take, like I said, you look at whether it's been capped yet, and that at least 95% of it is capped. If you've got a little bit left, you can also do the shake test where you just, hold it and you shake it, and if the honey runs out on the ground, then it wasn't ready. It was not thick enough yet with low enough moisture to be used. And so you put that frame back in and the bees will be mad at you, but they'll fill that back up where you shook their nectar out, and they'll get it done. And then when you're ready to get it done, how do you get the bees out of the box? Because they're all over the box up in the top part where you have full supers and full frames within those supers. And so there are 2 or 3 different ways you can do that. The fume board that you see at the top left of this is like an inner cover, but it's got a piece of felt material on it, and you spray this god-awful smelling stuff on there. And wear gloves, because if you get it on your hands, you'll be wondering, and your spouse will be wondering for the next 3 days, where have you been? But that, usually about 5 minutes, will drive the bees down into the very bottom of the hive because they don't like the way it smells. Below that, you see a bee escape, which is basically a one-way exit. It's a little maze that they go through, and they will leave out through that, and they'll get down into a lower box, and they can't figure out how to get back up. And so typically within a few hours or maybe a day, the top box or boxes will be empty. So you put that between the supers that you're getting ready to harvest and the brood or lower supers that aren't full yet. You heard Trevor talk about using a brush, and a lot of times you'll take a bee brush and just literally take the frames, use the brush, knock the bees off over the hive. They'll go back down to another frame. And then what I do when I'm using a brush is I've got a big plastic storage container from Home Depot or Walmart or somewhere that has a top on it. So I'll brush the bees off, I'll put it in there, put the top on it, go pull another one, brush the bees off, do that until I've got as many as I want to put in there, and then I'll take them up to the house to harvest. I normally do mine on a screened-in porch, so the bees are outside, most of them. There may still be a few in the box, so you got to brush them off. And if you're doing that on like a screened-in porch or something, you typically want to set up a fan that's blowing out, because that way, if it's blowing in, they're going to smell the honey, and they're going to be trying to come in wherever they can. But by the time you get to the end of that, you'll see them all over the screens and so forth, because they know what you're up to and they want to share. And then an air blower, like you use in your with your leaves and cleaning the patio and stuff like that, is another tool you can use. You can take a whole box and stand it up sideways, and if you've got a strong enough blower, you can blow a lot of the bees out of the box with that. Some people think that's a little tough on them, so you may not want to do that. I've tried that a couple of times, and my bees weren't happy. So I normally use the bee escape board on mine. Uncapping it, you've got different types of knives, like you see in the lower left picture there. Some of them are heated. Some of them are what you call a cold knife. You'll see some people will use 2 cold knives in a pot of water, hot water, and they just alternate each time. So it's warm and it makes it go more quickly. A comb type device in the upper left corner that can scratch off the cappings. And then if you're really into it, you can get automated machinery that will do a little assembly line of running these through and uncapping them for you. Extractors. There are a variety of extractors out there that use centrifugal force. Some of them, you've got a crank like an ice cream maker. Some of them have an electric motor. Some of the smaller ones and cheaper ones I've got one of those that is actually made from 2 5-gallon buckets like this Home Depot bucket here, or Lowe's, or wherever I got that one. And you take a cordless drill and connect it to the top of it, and it will spin the frames around. That's an easy and relatively inexpensive way to do that. You can do gravity. If you're not trying to save your comb, you can just literally cut out the comb, put it in a strainer like this, crush it. You filter it with pantyhose is what a lot of people use. Some people use like a t-shirt material or whatever. Other beekeepers will tell you not to use something cotton like that because it will get little strands of fiber in it that if you're trying to win a prize for really beautiful and clear honey at the state farm or something, if you've got little strands of fiber in there, that will keep you from getting the blue ribbon. So you've got the centrifuge extractor, you've got gravity feed or gravity like that, where you've crushed the wax and the foundation, and sometimes you'll also see people just take the capping off and let it slowly drip out of there. I've tried that, wasn't very impressed with it. It takes a long time laying it over a tray or something like that. Once you've done that, you've got a lot of wax mixed in with it, regardless of how you did it, whether you've cut off the wax cappings or whether you've crushed the whole thing. And so you filter that through some type of a filtering system, whether it be a plastic or a steel strainer type filter, or the pantyhose, or the paint strainers that you can get at Home Depot or places like that. But you filter that to get the wax cappings and so forth out, and then you're ready to go, and you go bottle your honey. You've got people who will go straight from that into their individual bottles or little plastic bears, or however you're saving that. Or some people, since you're usually doing that in July or August, depending on how quick you're going to use that honey, and I typically don't use mine until we get to the holiday season, and I'll start giving it to family and friends and stuff. I will put it in a 5-gallon bucket like that, a food grade bucket, and just store it in that until I'm ready to put it in the individual bottles. These pictures were made at Gene's house. These are Gene's slides. I need to give him credit for those. a couple of years ago when he was having a harvesting party, and where you get the extractor out, you invite the friends and neighbors over, you give them a little bit of honey, but they help you do the work. And his extractor is a hand crank, so he gets his neighbors out to help make a party out of it. And then for cleanup, the bees do all the work, because you can take whatever you've got left, whether it's the frames that still have a little bit of honey on them because you didn't get it all out, whether it's your equipment that you've used or whatever, but you put it out in the yard, and the bees will come take whatever scraps of honey they can find in there, and they'll take it back to the hive and backfill the other frames that are in there. So they do all that work for you, and it will look as clean as if you'd run it through a commercial dishwasher. Then you've got this drawn comb left. So what are you going to do with that? Because you know you want to use it again next season, because it's a lot easier for the bees to fill that up than it is to fill up or to draw out new comb. It's quicker. So you can put it in a freezer, and you don't have to worry about any type of pest bothering it. You can store it by putting it, a lot of people will take like a big garbage bag, put over it, put a little paramoth is something that will keep the wax moths out of there. It's not mothballs like you might put in a drawer full of sweaters or whatever, but paramoth is, I can't tell you the chemical differences or whatever, but it's supposed to be better for that. Or you can do, there are ways of doing just open air storage that will keep it from getting moths and stuff in there. So that's a quick run through of those slides. One thing I wanted to show you is, the cold knife that you just, work it back and forth as you're uncapping the honey, and then I'll typically take the comb, and if I've got spots where the knife wouldn't reach, because some bees are better than others at making it nice and uniform, and others are a little bit less even, so to speak. It may be very flat and even here, but it's built, if you didn't have your 8 frames or your 10 frames lined up perfectly right, if they were a little cocky, this end may be built out a little bit further, that end may be a little bit depressed or whatever. So you can get it uncapped using one of those tools. Then this is what you've seen Trevor and others showing you, where you've got the wooden frame with the wax foundation in the middle with wire, with or without wire, and then the bobby pins to help hold it. Some people will use plastic frames. I've found that if you're using the plastic frames, if you heat up some wax left over from last year and take a paintbrush or whatever and kind of paint it on there, that will make the bees more attracted to this than otherwise. The good thing about the plastic frames, if you're using an extractor, when it spins, they're not going to bow out in the middle like this will sometimes, especially if it's real heavy, and if you get a little overly aggressive and you're spinning it too fast, because you can have the whole frame come apart, or the wax part of it there, and so you don't have that comb to use again because you've gone a little bit too quick. One other frame that I wanted to show you is, you heard, I forget who, maybe Barry was talking about doing comb honey. And they make frames like this that you put a piece of, it snaps in half, you put a piece of foundation in it, and then you typically want to have this at the top of the hive or over a queen excluder so that you don't have to worry about eggs being laid in this. But then you just take a knife and cut that out, and you've got this nice circle of comb honey for people that like that. Then the last thing I was going to mention is something that's 3 years old, I guess, a product out of Australia that you may read about, that's being sold in the U.S. now by the guys that developed it. It's called the Flow Hive, and the Flow Hive frames are a lot thicker because the whole they don't draw out comb because it's already got the little individual cells. And if you can convince your bees to put honey in there, then that's a quicker build for them. I've tried some of these, and I'm doing something wrong because I haven't had much luck with it. I know I've got some beekeeping friends who will swear by this because they've had a lot of great results. The benefit of this is, you know, they cap it once it's done, and when you see that it's done, there's a little tool that slides into the end, and you give it about a half a crank, and it will move half of the cells up or down or whatever, and it cracks them open where they've been capped and so forth. And so the honey will drip out into the bottom of this frame, and then you attach a little hose to it, and it goes straight into whatever you're connecting with. You don't have to use the centrifuge or anything like that. You don't have to uncap it. So from that standpoint, it's a lot quicker if you can get your bees to work it. Like I say, I've not had any luck with that, but I'm going to try again next year because it's pretty intriguing. But then the other ways that you can get your wax, you can use a double boiler. It is, like I say, flammable, so you got to be careful about that. There are solar wax melters that you can buy or you can make that where you let the sun do that work, and it will help you get the wax melted, and then you can strain it, and you can get some really pretty wax to do things with. And then there's also pollen, because Harris mentioned that he collects and sells pollen. There's some other folks around who do that. Some people like me, just, you know, if you get a little pollen mixed in there with it, that's great. It's in there with the honey. So that's a quick run through of how you can harvest your honey and then get the sweet treat, so to speak, out of this vocation or hobby or whatever it is for you.